His grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we know there's days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior, has ransomed me, and like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior, has ransomed me, and like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace.
Welcome back, everyone. This week we come to Psalm 36. Psalm 36, and in this psalm, yet another psalm of David. This one, like most of the others, doesn't have a particular occasion attached to it in the superscription. Most of them don't, and really, I don't see anything in this one that would suggest it. Some of these psalms we've seen, it's evident that it's a time when, perhaps the psalmist is on the run in the wilderness, fleeing for his life, and that might lend itself to certain occasions in David's life. Other psalms where he's reflecting upon some great personal sin also may kind of lead you to associate it with certain events. This one, not so much. So attributed to David, and it could be at any number of points in his life. But this psalm overall is a contrast of wickedness and righteousness. And you get a little bit maybe of that. You recall last week we looked at Psalm 35. Psalm 35, one of the imprecatory psalms, very clearly so. In this one, maybe you get a tiny little bit of that in the very last verse, but not a great deal. So he does talk about wickedness and iniquity and the problem with such, but you don't get that kind of an imprecatory thought where he's very obviously calling for vengeance and retribution against those who are plaguing him. So we have a bit of a breakdown here that we'll look at. An outline. The first 4 verses, we have a description of the wicked. Verses 5 through 9, the next 4 verses, a description of God's mercy. So you get wickedness contrasted with God's mercy, particularly for the righteous. Verses 10 and 11, a prayer for deliverance, and then the final verse, the overthrow of the wicked. Right. So this idea that we've seen many, many times before in the Psalms, that the wicked ultimately are going to get what's coming to them, even if it seems like sometimes in this world they don't. So you might look at it also kind of breaking that down even further. The first 9 verses, so 3/4 of the Psalm, this contrast, wickedness and mercy / righteousness. And then in the final quarter, the last fourth, the final 3 verses, a prayer for deliverance for the righteous and overthrow the wicked. So we'll work our way through this one. And as I was looking back over this one, preparing for the recording, the most interesting things in it to me, and both of them are somewhat grammatical in nature, are in the first verse and the last verse. So as we kind of work our way through, I'll call particular attention to those. So the first verse, the transgression of the wicked saith within my heart that there is no fear of God before his eyes. And the reason it's a difficult verse is not so much because of the idea that's found in it. I think it's rather straightforward, but rather just the way it's worded. It's an awkwardly worded verse. We saw a number of those in both Ecclesiastes and Proverbs. Where it's definitely not the way you might say it in English, and so sometimes it's somewhat tricky to figure out. And you'll notice, if you're looking at the King James Version like I am, that there is in italics. When you're, and I'm not sure if other versions do this or if it's something that's unique to the King James, but when you see words in italics, it means they're not in the original text. It means that it's provided by the translator to try and help you make sense of what it is that's trying to be converted from ancient Hebrew into English. And I'll read from Brother Waycaster here, because he kind of captures this and expounds upon the challenge here. He says the difficulty in this verse can be seen in the different ways it is rendered or translated. The pulpit commentary translates the verse as transgression's oracle to the wicked is in the interior of my heart, which is quite different from the King James, the wording. The NIV renders it, an oracle is within my heart concerning the sinfulness of the wicked. Again, different. The New American Standard puts it, transgression speaks to the ungodly within his heart. More different still. And the problem with all of these, besides the fact that they're obviously very differently worded or translated, the big problem lies in whether it's his heart or my heart. And indeed, I think even in the King James, where it reads so awkwardly, it's the pronoun that makes it tricky. Is the psalmist talking about his own heart or someone else's? So one possible meaning of this verse is that the sinfulness of the wicked man deludes him into believing that his wickedness is known to no one but himself. In other words, he has deceived himself to such, and people do this all the time. So I could see that rendering. People do this all the time. They deceive themselves to the point that they think they're doing a really good job of hiding it when perhaps they aren't. I guess to borrow a popular phrase today, you could say that they believe their own hype. Right there, they've managed to trick themselves into thinking that they're much more clever than they really are concerning their true nature, their wickedness. So that's one possibility. Another suggests. Another commentator suggests that thus saith depravity to the wicked man, in the midst of my heart there's no fear of God before his, that is God's eyes. And I think whichever way you favor it, I mean whichever of those two spins you kind of take on it, or whatever you understand it to mean, ultimately it's the same point. I guess like I said, the difficulty lies in the grammar, not necessarily the meaning. Because either way you take it to mean grammatically, the ultimate meaning is that wicked people have no fear of God in their hearts. They have no regard for God's will. And again, either way, that's ultimately how it shakes out. So it's interesting, I think, again, because it's somewhat awkwardly worded. It's of grammatical interest. But bottom line is, wicked people don't care. They don't fear God. They have no respect for God. Verse 2, for he flattereth himself in his own eyes until his iniquity be found to be hateful. And for that reason, I'm personally inclined to kind of go with the first of those two possibilities that we discussed regarding what the first verse means. The wicked man fools himself. He doesn't fear God, and he's deceived himself regarding his own iniquity. Verse 2 suggests just that. He flattereth himself in his own eyes until his iniquity be found to be hateful. Right? I mean, there's going to come a point, and this is kind of the overall message of the psalm, as we'll see, even coming all the way to the very last verse. There's going to come a point where it can't be hidden. Right? It's going to be dealt with one way or another. It's all going to come out in the wash, and it's going to be God who is going to do the discovery of it. But verse 2, as Brother Waycaster notes, or rather as the pulpit commentary notes, and he observes, is another rather obscure verse itself. I guess partly because the first one is. Right, so I guess it kind of depends on how you take the first one's going to have some bearing on how you read the second, and vice versa. But again, the suggested meaning here is that he flatters himself and conceals his sin from God so that God won't discover it to hate it. Right, so he's hiding it. Again, deceiving himself, maybe to the point that he's convinced himself that isn't a problem. Which is interesting, and this thought literally just occurred to me as I'm speaking here. You recall David's great sin. Not to say that that all sin isn't a problem, but the reason David's sin regarding Bathsheba and Uriah, which was, as we've discussed 100 times before, different because he wouldn't acknowledge it. It took Nathan and the parable to get him to admit it. But I can't help but wonder if on that occasion, and maybe it has some bearing on Psalm 36 here, that David had managed to deceive himself regarding that particular sin, to rationalize it away, to bury it somewhere down deep where he forgets that it's there. However it works, but I think here in Psalm 36 too, you get the notion of a person who is, who's wicked. But in his own eyes, he either doesn't see the problem, he doesn't recognize that he's wicked, again, maybe perhaps because he doesn't care, he has no regard for God's word, he doesn't know that he's wicked, or he feeds himself lies to the point that he deceives himself about it and comes to believe that he really isn't, even though he otherwise knows that he is. But again, ultimately, until his iniquity be found to be hateful, it's going to come out, right? It's like whether he wants it to be discovered or not, it is going to be. Continuing on to verse 3, again, kind of feeding back into what we've been saying about the first two verses, and what I think the meaning is, despite some of the grammatical difficulties with this, is the words of his mouth are iniquity and deceit. He hath left off to be wise and to do good. He deviseth, so again, everything he says is a lie. I would argue, including to himself, and certainly to God, and certainly to other people, certainly other people around him. I get the impression that this is the kind of person who, if you ask anyone around him, what kind of a man is this? He's great. He's absolutely wonderful, because he's good at deception and hypocrisy. But this is not a good person. How bad is he? Verse 4. He deviseth mischief upon his bed. You think about when you lay your head down at night. You've got all of the busyness of the day, the million things in life that pull you in different directions. You can't find a moment to think. You're constantly running. But then finally, at the end of the day, you lay your head down. You're there. It's dark. It's quiet. All of the distractions are gone. So often that's when your mind can get going on its own. And if there's something that you've been anxious about, something that's been bothering you, a lot of times, during the day when you're keeping yourself busy, you can sometimes manage to forget about it for a while. But then you lay down at night, there's nothing else there. Your mind works of its own accord, and it comes back to haunt you. This person that the psalmist is describing is so wicked that when he lays his head down at night, he isn't bothered by the stress and anxiety that ought to be the result of his wickedness, but rather he's lying there in the peace of the night, plotting more mischief. Again, it's a picture of someone who has deceived himself. Right, his moral compass is pointing south, but he thinks it's pointing north, or maybe he's convinced himself that that's the case. He deviseth mischief upon his bed. He setteth himself in a way that is not good. He abhorreth not evil. Yet again, the idea that this is a purposeful decision on this individual's part. He's wicked. He's purposefully wicked, so wicked that even when he lays his head down at night, not only is he not bothered by his wickedness, but he uses it as an opportunity to revel in it and plot even more. He has no regard for the Lord, and he deceives himself about it. Whether that's the idea that he'll never get caught because he's so good at hiding it, or maybe he has genuinely managed to convince himself that he's actually a good person. Ultimately, however, it isn't going to matter. It's going to come out. So that's the wicked in verse 4. And we're going to revisit the wicked in the very last verse. So in the next four, 5 through 9, which I guess would be the second third, right? 12 verses, 4 out of 12, so the second third, the middle third. He turns to the Lord's mercy. And with this section in particular, this section reads like many other Psalms. Now, in my personal opinion, it's somewhat typical of the language of the Psalms. But I can't help but think here about Psalm 8. And you almost get the impression here that the psalmist is in a very a contemplative kind of mode. Perhaps he's somewhere outdoors. You know, he sees creation and nature's beauty around him, because you get a lot of natural world kind of imagery. Thy mercy, O Lord, is in the heavens, and thy faithfulness reaches unto the clouds. Thy righteousness is like the great mountains. Thy judgments are a great deep. O Lord, thou preservest man and beast. So mountains, clouds, heavens, it's a lot of nature type of scenes that he uses to describe how vast the Lord's mercy is, how good it is, how majestic. He compares his judgments to a great deep, right? How unfathomable, how you can never imagine the depth of God's ability to see and to understand and to correctly judge things. How excellent is thy loving kindness, O God. Therefore the children of men put their trust under the shadow of thy wings. Right. So again, nature. You have this picture of a bird sheltering its young underneath its wings. They shall be abundantly satisfied with the fatness of thy house, and thou shalt make them drink of the river of thy pleasures. For with thee is the fountain of life. In thy light shall we see light. So again, very, very lofty language describing the goodness, the perfection of God, of His mercy, and how abundantly He cares for and blesses the righteous, those who put their trust in Him. Again, contrasting with the guy from the first 4 verses who most certainly doesn't. Verses 10 and 11. In light of this, in light of God's mercy, His loving kindness, His judgment, the prosperity with which He blesses His children, those who follow after Him, all of these good things, He says, continue thy loving kindness unto them that know thee, and thy righteousness to the upright in heart. Again, the upright in heart, those who follow after God, those who do fear God. Again, noting the contrast. So let God's righteousness continue to the upright in heart. Right? Righteousness is right doing. So the psalmist is imploring, God does right by those who are upright. Let that continue to be the case. Let not the foot of pride come against me, and let not the hand of the wicked remove me. So two potential adversaries there. The second one being the one that we've seen so many times in the Psalms. Let not the hand of the wicked remove me. Right. So don't that guy that he described in verse 4. Don't let that guy get me. Right. And that's common. We've seen that in umpteen other Psalms, especially the last one, Psalm 35, where it's the main idea. But also in the first part of that, let not the foot of pride come against me. The psalmist, perhaps they're recognizing the fact that he can be his own worst enemy. And if you go back and look at the very beginning of the psalm, the first 3 verses in particular, pride, I would think, is a good description of that individual. So when I look at verse 11, kind of this final thought before the closing verse, don't let the wicked remove me. Don't let me fall victim to them, but also don't let me become like them. Don't let me be so eaten up by pride and foolishness and wickedness that I come to be in a position where I fall I fall away from God's mercy and loving kindness because I'm like the person that we started this psalm with. So we started the psalm with the wicked and we close it with the wicked. There are the workers of iniquity fallen. They are cast down and shall not be able to rise. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that for me personally, the two most interesting things in the psalm are in the first verse and the last one, and they're both grammatical. So the very last verse, verse 12, is somewhat I guess it can be, depending upon how you're reading it, interesting. There's a thing in English, it's unique to English, called the preparatory there. And I suppose so. If you say for example, you're outside and you're talking to someone, and you see someone across the street, and you say, "Hey, there's a guy by that bush over there." If you're diagramming that sentence, you're trying to find the subject, the predicate, the verb, the objects, and so forth. What do you do with there? Right? There is a guy by the bush. In English, we have the preparatory there, and it has no grammatical relationship to the rest of the sentence at all. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't even belong in the sentence, really. And other languages don't have this. If you've ever studied another language, this does not exist. So I guess if you didn't have the preparatory there, you would say, a man is by that bush. Right? You don't have to say there's a man by that bush. You would just say a man is by that bush. The there is unnecessary. It's extra, but we do it all the time. It's a very common thing. We use it all the time, but we don't think about it. So often in the English language, the word there isn't really necessary. And I mention that to say, because when I came across this verse, it struck me as a preparatory there, but it isn't. It isn't. The word is actually there in the original Hebrew. Again, like I mentioned in the beginning, it's not in italics. There is a Hebrew word there that means there, thither. It's indicating a location. So where is this location? There, in that place, are the workers of iniquity fallen. They are cast down and shall not be able to rise. Frankly, I'm not entirely sure. Is he talking about where they happen to fall? I think what he means is before God. I think that's what he means. But I freely admit I'm not entirely certain. So there is a pronoun referring to some location, right? Like if you tell someone, you know what, I'm going to McDonald's, I'll meet you there in an hour. Well, where is there? It's McDonald's, right? McDonald's is the antecedent of there. It's what the pronoun stands in for. Here, it isn't clear. Again, when I read this, my initial thought was, is this preparatory? Is it not talking about a location? But again, it isn't. It does mean a location, though I'm not entirely sure where it's meant to be. I was thinking, it just popped into my head, it sounds like something Donald Trump would say. There's no there there. There's no there there. And I guess in that case, the first there, so you got three there's. The first there would be a preparatory there referring to the second there, which is also a preparatory there. And then the third one would be an actual location. So if you say there's no there there, the only one that indicates any kind of real location at all is the third one. The other two, I guess the second one would be a preparatory there for that one, and the first one would be like a second order preparatory there for the second one. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. There being an actual location. Okay, so anyway, that is Psalm 36. And real quickly before we go, I'll note a couple of the lessons here that Brother Waycaster had noted from this particular psalm, and we'll finish with that. So he notes, when men cease to fear God, transgression increases and the heart becomes hardened. And I suppose you could think about that as this idea that you find in the New Testament of one's conscience becoming seared. If you're wicked enough, long enough, if you deceive yourself enough, you feed yourself enough lies, you can reach a point where you're beyond feeling it. You know, they have a conscience being seared. You think of something that's seared; it's become hardened and tough on the exterior, and nothing can penetrate it. I can definitely see that. You get a bit of that from this psalm, the description of this wicked person. He has deceived himself so much. He has flattered himself so much that he's become incapable of seeing it. Again, like I mentioned earlier, David in this sin with Bathsheba, where it took Nathan the prophet bringing that parable to him to get him to admit it, to see it, to realize it. You can certainly come to that place. Children of God must abhor that which is evil. Number 3, your sin will find you out. You can run, you can hide. Certainly in this life, there are plenty of people who live wicked lives, and no one around them has a clue. They do a good job of covering it up and concealing it, but you can't hide it from God. Eventually, it is going to come out. Man reaches a new low of wickedness when he meditates upon mischief on his bed and sets himself in a way that is not good. Yet again, now that's I think perhaps a really good picture of a person whose conscience has been seared. If you can lie in bed at night with nothing but the company of your own mind, and instead of being bothered by the wickedness you've been perpetrating in the day, you're laying there contemplating how to do more of it, that's a problem. The mercy of God is beyond our comprehensions. Again, the psalmist likens it to the heavens, something that reaches into the clouds. Those who put trust in God will not be disappointed, rather abundantly satisfied. And then finally, pride has destroyed many a man. Certainly all of these are the case. And that is Psalm 36. I hope you've enjoyed looking at it with me today. Lord willing, we will continue next time with Psalm 37. Thank you very much for your attention.
Over all the earth you reign on high, every mountain stream, every sunset sky. But my one request, Lord, my only aim, is that you'd reign in me again. Lord, reign in me, reign in your power, over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? Over every thought, over every word, may my life reflect the beauty of my Lord. 'Cause you mean more to me than any earthly thing. So won't you reign in me again? Lord, reign in me, reign in your power, over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? Lord, reign in me, reign in your power, over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? You are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign